This image has nothing to do with anything except for just so random. So I'm pulling it up, and for those of you who know or don't know who this person is, first, this is a couple of years ago, and I think one of the interesting histories of 3 decades almost of creating Next Jump has been just the number of interesting people over time we've met. And just so you know, I have zero political interest whatsoever, even though we get invited to help train and coach leaders in politics all the time. And Megan had a point out instantly, I got a little bit of a pot belly.
No, the shirt's just not fitting as good, so we like to be critical.
So this is a picture with Kevin McCarthy when he was the leader of the House. And only through movies I've known this, where if the president of the United States, disappeared or died, the vice president takes over. If the vice president had that, it's the Speaker of the House, the most senior person in Congress that actually takes over as president. So it's like a pretty senior role. And of course I was very confused because I was like, why is the leader not the highest position? The speaker is higher than the leader, which maybe is an archaic industrial age thing that whoever gets to speak is naturally the leader and the leader is not, Anyways, so I met Kevin McCarthy a couple of years ago when he was the leader, and last week it was just nonstop news in the US about him trying to pass multiple rounds of voting to become the speaker, which is the highest position in Congress. And so I spent July 4th with Kevin McCarthy several years back. And it's like one of those just meet all these people and spend it with his wife and his daughter, and had no idea really what he was and what he did. And my wife is obsessed in all the stuff on the news. As she's reading it, she was telling me all the stuff happening with Kevin McCarthy on a daily basis, how many votes, not failed, vote again. And I was like, oh, I met Kevin McCarthy. She's like, what? I was like, why would you meet Kevin McCarthy? I was like, here. Found the picture, sent it to her, and she starts laughing. And she was like, only you, who literally have no interest in politics, right? None. And spent July 4th,
Yeah, but tell them the real part of the story. So I said, this has nothing to do, and I mean nothing to do with our class today, but I thought it was funny. And I wanted you just to kick off January. I think it's kind of funny. So if you've been with us for a while, I think you have a certain view of Charlie and who he is, his character. But I've been working with him for 25 years, so I just wanted to share. I want him to share this story because it's so descriptive to me of Charlie's character, and it reminded me of the work we used to always do at these auto shows. We used to work in the automobile industry. We used to be in Detroit a lot back in the day. And all the shows you go to, you can press the buttons and go in the cars and open the doors and just touch everything. That is Charlie. To the point where sometimes they're looking and they're like, you don't have to touch everything.
You might break something, right?
I used to be uncomfortable. I'm like, you don't have to go into every door, open every compartment, just nice car, move on to the next one. I don't know, you don't have to touch everything, right? So.
No, and of course, I've had similar things. We have Admiral Burke here with us, and as he visited, whether it's Navy or Air Force, I assume when the thing is not running, or if it's running, you press some of the buttons, right? No, I'm usually pressing the buttons, wondering what it does and whatnot, and
That's a better example.
As Megan flips out, but so in this case, one of the things, they kind of take you around in motorcade and all this stuff, but Secret Service was with him even when he was leader of the House, and so I think it was late night. Or July 4th, sort of holiday weekend, and they wanted to give us a private tour of the Capitol. So I was I'm not just into that stuff that much. So I was fine, some pictures on the wall and all this stuff. So you go and it looks kind of cool. It's where they have their Congress meetings and whatnot. And so the only thing I'm thinking is, I'm going to go and sort of pretend to be the president. Where's the president stand? Because if you look in the video stuff,
you always see
the speaker's above. The speaker is sitting above, and the president's below, which I thought was it's so weird. But I was all right. And so I went to go and just kind of feel and pretend to be the president. And I'm talking about Secret Service, the speed they move to tackle me down. And it's, I guess.
I'm not surprised,
Remember, there was nobody. There was nobody in the building. It was just us.
I know, but I would never go, maybe I would. I don't know, because I wasn't there. I don't know the situation. But it's so fitting that Secret Service, tackled you. They didn't actually physically throw you to the ground.
I'm not to the ground, but they restrained me pretty aggressively. And I'm thinking, I don't understand. I've been with you like for the last couple of days. Like,
What? Yeah.
what did I do that you're treating me this
Yeah,
way? And I
yeah.
guess there's some rule or law that you're
can't.
not allowed to stand in some box vicinity of where the president stands, because I could have, you know, had poison on my fingertips and put it somewhere or something. Who knows what? But yes, whatever the
Risk
the-
taking, there's some risk
I
taking.
didn't think of that as risk taking. I just thought I was so bored that I thought it would be the only fun thing,
He's so
but clearly it turned out not to be very acceptable to the Secret Service. But anyways,
Okay.
that's not the class we're going to talk about, but the class is going to talk about Module 3. We've talked about for a while. The way the Module 3 is built, it's called Mod 10X, stands for Modified 10X. Right before the holidays, I think a lot of you actually got to experience what a 10X coaching session looks like. But it's a modified version built to help you become a great decision maker. And the notion of, low decision makers or poor decision makers or mid or mediocre decision makers tend to not do well in life. It tends to have a high cost, whether it can be in your job, whether it's as a member of the family or just an adult. It's just not very good. And decision making is, of course, hardest when you're trying to make decisions in uncertainty, as opposed to something that is more certain or straightforward. So this is the training. I think it's something that I think a lot of you have been waiting for. We've been building the building blocks of kind of getting to this place, and I believe this class is so much more appropriate to kind of what is even the exact time right now, end of this COVID era, even though COVID's still here, right? But 2023, there's some element of how do I get back to normalcy life and make things happen and work in my life? And so I start the slide with what you classically see right around now, what you read about, all types of New Year's resolutions. A lot of stuff, I'm just looking at this image off the internet, is almost like a negative, like don't do list, right? Like,
Yeah.
As in like.
Clean up the bad stuff.
Yeah, quit smoking, save money, like, it's like don't frivolously spend money, don't do all these bad things. New Year's resolutions tend to be here, but at the sum of all of it, what New Year's resolutions really are, it's a plan, right? It's a plan, a goal, right, that you want to accomplish, right? And action is, of course, what you want to get to. But you have to realize what a goal and what a plan is. It's a prediction. It's a prediction where I have to think of, right, like obviously what I used to do and what I want different. And I have to visualize and I have to think that it's doable, which is why I bother making a goal and a plan, and then I act. Versus if I thought it was completely unreasonable, I wouldn't do anything. And I'm not sure I would even waste the energy making a plan unless I was forced to do it, right? And of course, at the beginning of the year or at the end of the year, people write about how I was so good at predicting. Listen to my predictions from last year. There's predictions into this year. And you're just seeing all kinds of, there's resolutions. Companies might have started off the first staff meeting with a message from the CEO or the leader or speaker, right, at some point, of like what their goals and their objectives are. Basically, this notion of prediction. And how we think of it as almost an annual thing.
Right.
And yet the reality is that we as human beings make predictions all the time. And we can narrate that we don't, right? And when we were talking, Megan and I were talking, that this idea of lack of prediction is almost the source of mental chatter, which is what drives mental health challenges, where
We're going to break this down.
So we're going to break this down.
I feel this is a very
Right.
hard concept at the high level, so we're going to try to dive into it, because I think the notion of predictions, most people think, well, I'm not making a lot of predictions, I'm not a stock trader, we are doing it all the time without even recognizing it.
Yes.
We're going to talk about how it's actually like breathing, like you're doing it all the time. It's not like you can choose to do it or not doing it, you're actually doing it. But sometimes you're just not aware that you're doing it, and you're not sharing it and exposing it. And so we're pretty bad at it just in general. It's kind of like breathing, like you can improve breathing. And so anyway,
And when you think of all the advice out there about, how to change narratives, be positive, visualize success, visualize winning, visualize being, like wealthy or healthy or, and even when you think about risk mitigation, I think you think about bad things not happening. How do I prepare and plan for that? And there's a video talk, we had shared in one of our earlier lists, I was trying to find it. It's on our YouTube channel from Sri Kumar.
Yeah.
Sri Kumar is one of the top-rated professors, business school professors out of Columbia University. He has a new book out, and so I put a clip of a book in this deck here. But there's a talk he gives, and he talks about the fact, and Sri Kumar is interesting because everyone's got a different like kind of shtick or niche.
Yeah.
He has taken the philosophy of kind of like Buddhism and all this like old literature
wisdom.
and translated it into sort of how it applies to practical business-minded thinking. And so it's interesting kind of the theme and patterns he found. But one of the things he definitely honed in on was this notion of mental chatter and how like, everyone talks about how it's bad, right? And his point was like, how do you shut down mental chatter? And yes, there's drugs that can help you numb out. There are things that people do to try to shut down mental chatter. But his point was, let's be real and get to the point that just mental chatter is. It's not a question of good or bad, it just is. It exists and we all have it. It's our mind running amok. And his main point that I love was that, and mental chatter looks at almost everything and instantly decides good thing or bad thing. Now there's a degree of how good or how bad. And he uses his example, which he shares in the video about like, generally speaking, I think the joke is that you don't like your in-laws, right? So when you're told that the in-laws are coming, right, your first thing is bad thing. Then you're told by your spouse that the in-laws are actually coming for the whole weekend. You're like, this is a really bad thing.
Right.
And if you think about what that is.
Judgment on that.
But it's a prediction.
A prediction.
It's a prediction.
So actually, sorry, what Nicole was asking, is a prediction just a judgment? So this is where we have to talk about the difference between a judgment and a prediction.
So you can judge something that happened in the past. You can judge something that's happening in the present.
Right.
But making a judgment.
That's a judge.
Right?
This is judgment,
Right?
yeah.
Just like you can make a decision. Looking back, you're like, that was a good decision, bad decision. I made a good decision today. There's a difference when you think about making a decision.
Into the future.
Applying judgment, right, into the future. And the reason why it's tough is that it's made up.
It's made up, yeah.
Right? Nobody can accurately predict the future. You can get better at it. There's techniques. And this is the single most important element of leadership, of decision making, which is the ability, and by the way, it's also the hardest, of how to turn this into a skill. And I love this analogy of breathing. A lot of people say, I don't make predictions, right? I don't make New Year's resolutions, I don't make predictions, because it doesn't, a lot of times it doesn't work out. It's a lot of mental energy wasted. Well, that's like saying I don't breathe, right? You do. You make predictions. Most of us are just poor at it. And more importantly, not only you poor at it, because you can't see it, you can't expose
you're not
what's happening.
exposing it, that's why you're poor at it.
Because
exposing a prediction is what then gets challenged.
You can't train. You can't work on anything you can't see. So it's like if you think you don't really breathe, then you can't work on breathing. You have to actually be able to see how you're breathing. And just like breathing, there are ways to actually train breathing. And I know there's a joke that we have in here called calibrate, right? Because the Navy SEALs do this, right? And sort of other special ops groups or high performing groups in at least the Navy and I'm sure other services where calibrate is basically their way of saying calm the fuck down, right? Through breathing. Right? And I guess it's almost like the way Tom smokes a cigarette, but instead of going in, it goes out.
Oh
Is how you calibrate.
This was like 20 years ago.
Throw that out.
Sorry, there's so much baggage that just came out because Trump's sitting right across.
Or I guess it's like blowing out a candle. You purse your lips if you want to say Bob and you, right?
What do you do? How do you calibrate?
You breathe in through your nose and you breathe out with pursed lips, but breathe out for twice as long. So in for 2, out for 4, or in for 3.
So it's like, when you have that complete panic and all that stuff, how you basically, it's their way of instead of saying calm the fuck down, which is kind of like, they just picked a different word, just calibrate, right? So the way you calibrate, you can learn this.
Heidi looks very confused.
But it's a skill. You can learn this.
You can learn to do it.
And they train it to the point where it's automatic versus most of us, when we're actually panicked, the last thing you'll be thinking is breathe in through the nose and breathe out twice as long, pursed lips. Like it doesn't come, it's not automatic.
Right.
But it stimulates
Train it.
the, I forget which is which, the
Big,
sympathetic or
parasympathetic,
parasympathetic
yeah.
response, the fight, the opposite of the fight or
Right,
flight.
right, yeah, calms you down,
Calms you down, your blood pressure goes down 10 points, your
yeah,
pulse goes down, your
right.
blood goes back to
But
your
to learn to
extremities.
do that on command when you're in a panicked situation, that takes training.
Takes training, takes
That's why we're
reps.
saying.
Takes reps.
Yeah,
I pulled a couple slides from some previous LIP classes. One is from LIP 125. And I like this image because this is notion of there's today, which is right in the middle. And you can look back and this idea that there's decision forks always in our life. And sometimes looking back, you can wonder, and this is where when people ruminate and they're like, oh, if I made that choice and that choice, like the problem is in the past, you can take a lesson, but you can't change it. So meaning you don't want to be driving, if you are a vehicle, you don't want to be driving the car looking through the rearview mirror or looking backwards. You have to keep your eyes forward.
Yeah.
Right? But the lessons are backwards, right? Oops, I ran over a squirrel, I should say more like, or oops, I went to the other person's lane, and it's like, you can see stuff happen in the back. But the reality is the car's moving, you have to look forward. And looking forward has this notion of, wow, there's a lot of decision forks in front of me. And prediction matters, and when we had taught this class, there's predicting, things really working well, which is kind of in detail, things working well in the future. There's things working really badly, and then there's kind of the reality of what happens for most, nothing changes. And we said the two most common errors is we tend to leave prediction fuzzy, right? We just leave it kind of fuzzy. And more importantly, we do nothing materially different, but we expect to win. The way I look at it when I think about what happens for most of us, indecision, inaction is the number one thing we do. We don't even recognize how much we talk ourselves into indecision and inaction. And we get into the state of being stuck. It's stale. Like we're going in circles, going nowhere. I look at it almost the purgatory of life. Like, how sometimes you'll say, God, I wish I got, like some people actually utter, I wish something failed because then I have to make a change, right? So obviously we want success, but you want failure that something has to change because the reality is otherwise I'm gonna stay where I am, but we don't voice this. It's all happening in our heads. There's this movie I watched this weekend called This Is 40. It's like,
remember that, what's like all shot in.
and if you watched a preview, actually, I think they had cuts that was not in the movie, but he like sits down and is talking to his buddy saying, have you ever thought about what it'd be like if your wife died? And what would you do next? And the guy's like, I think about it a lot. I thought about my second wife. And then they're like, no, but this is the mother of my children. So of course it'd have to be a painless float away to life. But this idea, and I mentioned this saying, whether it's like
So
being
dark.
widowed or divorced, whether it's being fired, it's this idea of we imagine out of our control.
A choice being made for us.
Because we don't want to make a
choice,
decision
yeah.
because it takes
Energy
thought,
and
energy,
thought.
risk.
And risk.
And this idea that if something else made the decision, I might be better off. I've joked around saying, in an old office, remember?
Yeah.
We wish there was a fire and everything burned down, so we have to even think about what to throw and keep,
Yeah.
right? I'm sure you've had this when you look in your closet. I wish someone came and just robbed my place and there's nothing left, so I'd have to start again, right? This notion of something bad, it's just kind of awful that
We can't make the
avoid
decision. Yeah.
making a decision, thinking about what all this means so much to the point I'd rather have someone fire me, rob me, burn down, and lose stuff so that I have to start again.
Yeah, it's-
Which, if you think about it, is just the most asinine thing we do, but we actually do this everywhere. And so I want to talk about this and kind of why this is happening as well as the real cost of it. I want to talk a lot about this thing that we introduced way back in LIP, I think it was
55.
55, ladders of inference. I think it's one of the most important elements of what human beings do not do. And we talk about communication. This is the most important element of communication. And ladders of inference has a couple different elements of it. It's a ladder for a reason. The first part you have to do is you have to actually start by sharing your conclusion. And you know why it's a conclusion? The conclusion, by the way, is hardest when you look forward, prediction. When it's in the past, you can say was it good or bad? which by the way is still debatable. There are things that happen and people say that was a good thing. You're like, no, that was the worst thing that happened to me. And they're like, well, look how where you are. Maybe that was the best thing that happened. There's debates there. But do you know how much harder, if you think debating the past or even debating today, is this a good class or bad? Like debating the future is much harder because it's all made up. Right? It's my mind, it's my thought against your thought, my opinion versus yours.
In the past, we call it forensics, right? You can do some forensics of things that have happened. It's a little easier because there's things that actually happen that you can, and we could still spend a lot of time debating if that was a good thing or a bad thing in the past, but it actually happened. So it feels, there's like data there to kind of analyze. You could still disagree, but there's a lot more forensics that can be done. Future, there's nothing.
And, well, it's not true, not true.
There's
See, this-
there's
so,
no data.
Well, that's not true, that's not true.
Okay, tell me.
That's not true, so this is the part.
Okay.
I have my prediction, right? And then there is, number one, my assumptions, which is the same as the data that I am gonna put out that informed my logic. And logic is another fancy word from my life experience, my mental models. They can come from books, they can come from movies, they can come from life experience, life lessons, mentors, they can come from anywhere. And some of them are just so rudimentary, so embarrassing that we won't share it.
It's almost like saying my data, because my data bank is
You know when
my
people
logic
say,
from my experience.
people do the whole my rule of thumb, right?
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
logic,
yeah.
right? But there's a notion of assumptions, which is what did I notice? And what data points am I putting into my logic, algorithm that led to a conclusion? But the notion of we don't first get trained to share conclusion and then back it up with these details. And the place that it's easiest to not do it is predicting the future. Because it's wrought with tons of controversial inviting of argument and whatnot, because it's all made up. It's my logic, my opinions, my assumptions of how I use the data, what I reject, what I keep. And this is the hardest part of leadership, of decision making. And it's the part that leads to good things versus bad things across most people. And the thing I said before, subtly at the very bottom, every decision we make, right, which leads to basically action, is connected to your prediction of how you see it play out. When I see it go really well, right, guess what? Usually you want to double down and do more. When you see it go really bad, we act, right, to fix something. But most times, we narrate and convince ourselves that too early, not sure, this and that, leave it alone. And I was telling Megan, like, that's indicating, when some researcher will be like, you know what, that data point's irrelevant, throw it out, right? What I just saw, I don't think factors in anything, throw it out. Or there's a part of, it's not enough data yet, right? So I'm gonna wait. And so then you look at the pattern and you're like, wait, am I doing that everywhere? Because the reality is, life is going to give you some data points that will predict it's trending to work. It's trending to, not work. And yet, we don't make those predictions, which means we don't, on our own accord, decide, act. We wait and expect change when nothing is changing from our own doing. And the biggest thing that occurs through that process is a term we learned from the military I like called time late. Time late is another word for below the lead time. So we're going to cover this in more detail. This is very cool. So I thought about an analogy that might help you best understand what this is like. And I thought kind of parking in the arrival section of an airport, I thought was the best example, right? Parking in a regular parking lot is different. You can park, turn your engine off, take a nap, read your emails, listen to music, whatever, you can chill out. If you ever go to pick up someone, right?
The arrival section,
it is just a nightmare, right? Because you have to start on one end, right? And someone says, I'm gonna meet you right in the middle. And as you move up, there's a police guy moving back and forth always time, knocking on your door to move, right? And so the notes I wrote for myself was this. It's very different than parking anywhere else because you have a slow burn of gas, right? And you have to always be alert. Like, have you ever tried to go in the arrival section and have a deep conversation with someone?
Yeah, you can't.
Because someone's gonna knock on the window, move, get out of here, move, get out of here. Like, so you feel no autonomy, you feel no control, and then guess
feel
what happens
anxious.
when you
You
get to
just
the
feel
end? You have to circle back around and do it over again, right?
Yeah,
And you're waiting,
yeah.
like,
It's not like
for
you're not-
someone else to arrive, right? Like, like imagine if I said, I don't know where we want to go. We're in New York City right now, but we're going to drive somewhere. Team, get in a car, right? Where should we wait to get instructions of where to go? How about go to Newark Airport, Terminal C, arrival section. I want you to wait there. Like, that is literally what most people do. They're waiting there, not sure, am I waiting for someone, waiting for what? And you're waiting for instruction to go, but you're burning gas, like, and the driver especially, alert, right? And someone's always knocking down, and you know this is a constant, you can't even sit still. Unfortunately, this is what decision-making and leadership looks like for most of us. And you can say, I'm not a leader for that reason, I don't make decisions for that reason, just like saying I don't make predictions. Then if you find yourself saying that, why don't you utter the words, I don't breathe. I really don't, right? Because you do, just the pour at it. And if you don't realize you're doing it all the time everywhere, so when we dive into a little bit more detail, this is interesting. This is kind of on our walls. Over 3 decades, the boiling down of what mattered most to the body and the mind, as in the worst thing. Because I mean, there's, when someone says take care of your body, there is a list of like 1,000 things that turns to 1,000 and 200 to 3,000. It's just nonstop. Every time, and now the big fad is a no alcohol thing, just because like you write that and everyone's going to read it, right? But every expert we work with, there's extremes. What you need, once again, not no, but less of for your body is sugar. There's nothing more lethal than sugar, right? In practical, real terms, right? Yes, there is something more lethal. It's called rat poison. It's also called, whatever. Like,
Yeah, your point
like,
is.
my
those
point is in
extremes,
realistic,
just- yes.
in practice,
Yes.
right? Less, what do you need to do less of for your body? Sugar. What do you need more of? Fermented foods, right? In the mind, what do you need less of? Silence. What do you need more of? A special ops teammate. Okay? So we're going to go into some of this. But what we spent 3 decades distilling down, right, is this. Within silence, there are, number 1, which then goes to number 2, areas of silence that is sugar for the mind. Number 1 is tied to my prediction, right? As in, when afterwards we say, I knew it. Like, knowing it in advance lets you do something. Don't blow the lead time. When you say something in hindsight, I feel one of the things that we convince ourselves is that we're amazing at predictions. We just always tell people after the fact.
Like the Monday morning quarterback, right?
Or it's like the stock, you're like, oof, I knew Tesla was gonna go down. Well, I knew Tesla was gonna go up in stock price. Like,
Right.
you knew it doesn't count, right? If you don't do it in advance. It's not a prediction, right? When it's not in advance. And then the second part is exposing not only the prediction, but then the assumptions and the logic behind my prediction. And these 2 things not happening in that order is the biggest form of silence, the biggest area of silence that is sugar for the mind. This is the notion, and by the way, not a New Year's Eve notion of intensity is hard, but consistency is way harder. So both the worst and the best things in life for body and mind are now left to things that are accumulated. Accumulated bad, accumulated good. And one of the blind spots we have, what we see everywhere, is accumulated silence is lethal for any human being. We talked about isolation. The biggest form of isolation is literally saying nothing, being by yourself. And that is the equivalent, according to the World Economic Forum, of 15 cigarettes a day. So those of you who like to smoke a lot, maybe you're like, I do more than that, so maybe no big deal. But I think most of us think that's not a very good thing. So the fact that isolation, silence, being alone in our heads is literally the equivalent of 15 cigarettes a day. In the silence, there's a part of it that matters most. And that part that matters most is tied to predictions. Because that's what drives all our decisions and action. So we're going to go into this.
Yeah, we're going to go into an interesting podcast because it's going to connect into, I think about worrying and, why you are awake at night and for those of you who struggle sleeping and why your head is spinning, right? That's the mental chatter, why you're kept up at night. You're making predictions of what's going to happen in my life. If you have older parents or young children or a spouse, or you're just constantly thinking about But we don't label that as a prediction, but that's what's happening. Obviously bad ones, usually most people worry more than say, oh my God, everything is great, everything is working out.
So I think we have to mute. I'm gonna play 2 minutes of this podcast. Seth Godin wrote like 20 books. People may read his blog and stuff, and he talks and references by Tim Ferriss's podcast, the most popular blog post he ever wrote. And it's talking about worrying and anxiety. And it's very relevant to this. So I think we're gonna mute ourselves so you can hear it, but I think you should really hear the sounds. I'm just gonna play this for like 2 minutes.
What about worrying? What's your perspective on worrying?
So I had a riff a while ago. It was one of my most popular blog posts. And I'm hesitant to dive too deep because I am not a medical professional. And there are people who are challenged by organic and trauma-related illnesses. But for leaving that group aside, anxiety is experiencing failure in advance. At least it is for me. Meaning that after it's over, we don't call it anxiety anymore. We're in grief or we're rebuilding. But when it might go wrong, worrying, anxiety is what we feel when we're imagining it did. And that's not helping anything. And so the question is, how do we focus that part of our attention on something generous instead? Because anxiety and worry is almost never in service of someone else. It's in service of our need for the status quo and reassurance. And I think that reassurance is futile because you never have enough of it.
Can you say more about that, please?
So it feels
Reassurance is futile because we can never have enough of it.
right. So it feels great to get reassurance. I wish that, the phone would ring and it's the head of the Pulitzer Committee saying that they read this thing I wrote and it's fantastic. I would be high as a kite for at least a day and a half. And then you'd need it again, because what it did for you was make you feel for a moment like bad outcomes weren't going to happen until you got new evidence that they might, and then you're back to anxiety and worrying again. So people who get hooked on reassurance might end up building an intimacy with the person who's reassuring them all the time, but it is not helping them do better work, nor is it making them happier. The alternative is to say, this might not work. This thing I did, this thing I cared about might not work. Odds are it won't, but I have a portfolio and then I'll make the next thing. Because we don't live on the savannah. This is not a matter of life or death most of the time. It is instead a matter of ego and self-esteem, and it's not fatal. And so all of the worrying is worse than the rejection when it finally comes. So better, I think, to merely do the work, be generous with the work, and improve our skills so we can do it again. And that gets back to Elizabeth.
I'm going to reshare so I don't have to. You guys can hear us, right? Just get back to the. All right. So, most advice on this topic: worrying is bad, anxiety is bad. Dial it down. Don't do it.
Great, thanks.
It doesn't work for most of us. And this is the part when I don't think there is probably topics of more sort of like just straightforward, just don't do it, it's bad for you, right? So then you're surrounded by friends and media and everything saying, yep, don't do it, don't do it. Well, so guess what? It just is now in my own head when I lie in bed late at night or when I'm quiet alone and I get to do all of that stuff on my own, right? And that's mental chatter. The notion of kind of how do we attack this, and that's not the way to do it for most of us. Sometimes it works, right? Sometimes we're like, oh my God, I had no idea it was that bad. And yeah, you're right, that's experiencing failure in advance. My God, what a great way, and boom, makes me better. But I promise you, for most of you, that will fail too. Failure points is one of the biggest areas that in practice leaders and practitioners find. And so I want to talk quickly about, this is a diagram we've used, and I find this diagram coming in from the research as the best way to think of how our brain works. And kind of why this matters is the brain works We have three different compartments of our brain of what and how information's stored. 50% of it is tied to the past, 10% is in the present, and 40% future outlook is the prediction. And there are times where research historically on just human beings and understanding the brain especially has been wrong or outdated. One of the areas that was wrong that we learned over the years, meeting so many experts, was the notion of the past is the past, you can't change it, right? Which is why we obsess on looking forward. And the whole notion of think about your tombstone, visualize success, rewrite the narrative, all the positivity was that the 50% past can't be changed. So the real pie of your brain that matters is just the other 50%. And you can actually do that much better by changing the way we look at the 40%. Because the 10% is real. If I just got fired, it's hard to say, no, don't worry, right? You're successful. I'm like, I don't feel that way based on the present. But the 40%, I could write that this could be the birthplace of a new career and whatnot. And so all the emphasis went towards the 40%. So where the research was wrong was about the past. That the notion that the past is done, and we share this going way back, meeting some amazing people, but the interesting thing about the past is that our memory and the recall memory of the past actually alters what the past is doing to form our mental models. So there's a lot of work there, but once again, even the past is still easier than the 40%. So we won't spend this class on that because I think there's plenty of lip classes on this part, but where the research is wrong is about the past not mattering. Not mattering in the sense of it's done, so let's send the energy where it matters. No, it does matter because you can actually alter your memory of the past based on how you re-remember it, right? I think of always re-remembering it, and especially telling the story to someone is like an extra re-remembering it.
You're attaching new emotions
every
to
time,
that
right?
story.
So, but the part where the research is right and why tombstone exercises, which is kind of what do you see on your tombstone when you die? What do you want your legacy to be remembered by? Narratives and positivity, goals, visualize success is all tied to this 40%. So where it is correct is that this is the driver of your decision making. It's the driver of your judgment, of where you choose to expend energy to change the outcome of where you're heading now. There's a trajectory we're on, and to change it in our control versus an external factor saying, nope, you're fired, or nope, this, or yes, this, you won the lottery, oh my God, now I can do something different. These external factors aside, right? Our choice, our autonomy, our control decisions tied to how we know, just like breathing, how we know how to actually make better predictions over time. And what's interesting about this notion of this prediction part, the more times you predict and it's wrong, what do? We're less likely to predict. We're less likely to train this muscle, and we tend to give up, right? There's a lot of articles now even about companies saying, I predicted COVID window wrong. I thought e-commerce would grow. I thought, oh my God, headcount growth. We overhired, and their CEO was talking about they predicted incorrectly what would happen, right? So you hear about the big stuff. But when I think about the nearly 3-decade journey we had at Next Jump, I think about the first and foremost part that we focused on almost from the very beginning, that it was people were the top driver of success, human capital. And when I think of human capital, I think about the big shift that occurred of human beings working harder to then working smarter. And working smarter is another way to say, use your head. Your head is 3 different buckets, and we sometimes treat it like it's one container. It's 3 containers, and we have to realize we train each container differently. Okay? Use your head. Then when we dove deeper into, well, what about using your head is the hardest? We quickly honed in, and this is over a decade ago, maybe a decade and a half, to the notion of leadership. And the word leadership is so overused. I think, well, what does that even mean? One way I think of leadership is when something is not straightforward. You need leadership. When something is straightforward, no one says, oh, we really need leadership here.
Yeah,
like I was trying to think, I was just taking a quick shower. I was like, my youngest daughter, Olivia, when she turned 9, last year in the fall, they always do a piñata for whatever reason, but the kids are breaking the piñata. And when the piñata breaks and the candy all falls out, I don't think anyone's thinking that we really need leadership here, right? It's complete chaos, but like we need leadership. No, it's just like, let them have it, everyone goes nuts and someone always gets something, right? But like, when you see maybe kids breaking down and crying and fighting on stuff, then you
Somebody's
start
gotta step
thinking,
in, yeah.
now you need leadership,
Yes.
right? Meaning, when something is straightforward, no one ever says, we really need leadership, there's lack of leadership. When it's not straightforward is when leadership is where we say we need, right? So you think of leadership, so we went to if leadership is the hardest part of working smarter, using your head, well, what's the hardest part of leadership? Because there's a lot of skills leaders need. And it wasn't very long spending time meeting the best of the best across different industries that we saw the common theme, that it was decision making. That was the hardest skill within leadership. And as we dove into decision making, and we dove into what about decision making is the hardest, the single hardest part of decision making is connected to predictions. Because it's inherently not only difficult to do, right?
It takes a lot of energy to do it.
And it's made up.
It's made up.
It's made up. I'm sharing how I see something play out, knowing that in the future, all things are possible,
Right.
both good and bad. This is the hardest part of leadership. And by the way, not to complicate the fact that we have 3 different buckets in our head
Yeah.
of how our brain categorizes information, each bucket in its extreme has both the good thing and bad thing,
So we
right?
have 6 different things we have to
6 different
wade
things.
through.
And one of the common patterns that we're seeing, and I think we'll see more and more data on this, the younger, less experienced people are, and I think right now the common word of vibing, right? Which is another way to say live in the moment, be present, right? Because by the way, that can be an imbalance or an impediment for people, right? You can live in the past, which is what leads to usually like depression. You can live in the future, which leads to worry or anxiety. So the notion of vibing is important, but the idea that if you're only using that 10%, there's a huge flaw in your assumption acting like your other 90% isn't being used. It's happening, but it's happening as mental chatter, whether you realize it or not. So at the junior levels in most organizations, we find most common error is the perception or belief that the vibing, the 10%, is what matters most. And so they need to recognize, I am doing other stuff, and I need to find a way to expose it and work on that stuff. At the senior levels, the most common imbalance we found, so in this again, we might kind of play this out a little differently, is that there's an imbalance in how they actually look at not only the past, they tend to connect into the future, and that imbalance, I think a couple of years back, we call it a narrative imbalance. They're imbalanced in whether it is a positive or it's a negative. Sometimes what they call an optimist, right? Or a pessimist, or a drunken optimist, or a drunken pessimist. And if you think about the future, the danger of it is saying, both sides are possible, but you're walking around acting like only one side is. Do you think you'll make good decisions? Do you think that you're going to lead not only yourself or others well? Do you think that's called using your head? Do you call that being smart? When you know it's fully possible for both outcomes, and I'm walking around pretty certain it's only one, right?
Yeah, it's like the biases and blind spots we have, right? I mean, we're the longer we're living and making predictions or not making them and just kind of ruminating, we're getting more and more imbalanced, right? So that's why we're saying the senior levels, we think we'll see in the data, right? That this, and we have all the Dev GPS, all that work in the assessment, is that you'll actually see an imbalance in senior people who have just lived through more experiences, making more decisions, maybe making more predictions. But at the junior level, just keeping things very fuzzy in the past and the future.
Yeah, well, a lot of people do the whole I'm scarred, right?
Yeah.
So on
Right.
one hand, this is where the research was true. Okay, you're scarred from the past, but the problem is you keep scarring yourself looking forward because you're not using your head. You're acting like looking into the future. I have absolute certainty. You could almost add the word guarantee. I guarantee this will not work.
And is that like the self-fulfilling prophecy, I guess? I mean, in many ways, that's what it is, right? Like,
Well, self-fulfilling prophecy
carrying
or
my negative past into the future. is a,
No, I think less, so they're self-fulfilling
Yeah.
prophecy, but there's the flip side, which is you're driving with like one eye closed. And
yeah.
given how difficult life is, I would say that you're gonna be what I would
It's
call
gonna be
a
accidents,
low
yeah.
or a poor decision maker, right? Every action you do is likely to have some wins, but the failures will wreck you. Charlie Munger, Warren Buffett's kind of training partner, is famous for saying how many people squirrel away wins, but with one move or a few moves, they just destroy all of it, they're back to zero. Doesn't even matter, you'll be back to zero, right? All that energy squirreling away wins will be gone anyways, because of the fact that you naively went in thinking there's only one possible future. Either all good, right, or all bad, right? And so that's imbalance is something that you have to be able to get aware and you have to work on it. Now, here's something that's interesting. When I think about the present, it is hard to live in the moment. It's hard to engage in it, but it's even harder to then expose it to another human being, right? The problem with exposing it to yourself, do you know how many times, like, you know, I watched Jeopardy or something like that, and I'd be like, yeah, that was the answer I was gonna say.
Yeah.
It's not true, right? Like how many, I knew that team would lose, or I knew that would happen. You know what, I kind of had this feeling that was the lottery number, right? Like this notion of like, you actually distort your prediction abilities, because by doing it in hindsight, you can convince yourself and you can convince others too, right? And I'm like, then why are you so broke? If you are so good at predicting, whether it's going to Vegas or going to invest in the stock market, go do that, right? But the reality is that it's not correct, and it shows up if you expose it. So in the present moment, by the way, it's very hard still to expose it. People struggle. In the past, it's, I would argue, 10 times harder. There's some, especially in the negative front. I know we are very good at repeating the same heroic, great things that happened in my life. Back in my days, in my heyday in college, you should have seen Charlie Kim, that orange shirt picture, when I was in the swim team, 4% body fat, my God, can I tell you. I could eat a pint of ice cream a day. It's like, yeah, I can repeat that part. But the parts that we will often struggle are the things that happen badly, to go in detail and walk through and not only explain what happened, but start to even share the messy details that show up. You know what? I might have had some fault in some of that bad stuff.
Yeah.
This is really hard to do. Life is not so clean cut, both good and bad. And so in everything good or bad, there's a part of, I might have had nothing to do with the good, right? Is what's going to show up if you really go into detail. And the bad, I might have had something to do with it too, right? I might not have been the majority of my fault, but that's 10 times harder. Prediction, I'm telling you, it's 10 times 10. It's 100 times harder. And the need to do it with ladders of inference, right? We talked about this in Lip 55. The bad habit is to not use this tool. UFC, which stands for unfiltered communications, as in, you know, we don't share the details. There's an order of the details. Conclusion first. You know why conclusion first? We like to contribute, right, into a prediction, don't we?
Right, yes.
And the contribution is, well, have you thought about this? It's like,
Well, I guess when you look at Twitter, that's what you see. Somebody makes a prediction or something, and you see in the thread, everybody's just contributing their point, but not, you know, the person, whoever is actually posting something like
well, Twitter also is safe because you can have your fake name and you can go and make wild predictions.
Yeah.
It's like what happens in
Yeah.
social media. You can be bold, right?
Yeah.
You can be bold because
Yes.
no one can track you down,
Right.
right? But go to someone that you know that you're going to see the very next day, maybe for lunch, right? Go make predictions. Go make predictions about what's happening in your life, their life. Suddenly, not so easy, you know? And especially when it's not like middle of the road hedging, but like a prediction, good or bad, right? This is a good thing. This is a bad thing, right? I see a leak in the office, right? This is a bad thing, right? And I can then explain the reasons, the assumptions, why or what not, or maybe like it's just temporary, it's not a big deal, right? Like there's all these elements, and exposing not only the conclusion, because I see
Yeah.
conclusion because it's a lot easier to say, you know what I'm going to do to protect my social capital and not have anyone have conflict or argument with me? I'm going to throw out something that might be either good or bad, and then let someone else take that point and then throw the conclusion out. And then when it was wrong, I can say, oh, that's what I said.
Right.
You thought it was good, right?
Yeah.
You thought we should bet.
Yeah.
You thought that was bad and we should fire that person or
Yeah.
we should make that change. And then you'd be like, no, but you told me this data point, but like, well, I just contributed what I saw.
Right, and that's just
Right?
playing it safe, right? I mean, that's just playing it safe.
So
Not, yeah, not.
module 3 of training that we put together, remember predictions, it's made up, which means both sides, you have to recognize good and bad are possible. And the training that you need, right? Training partners, called TPs. TP1 makes a prediction, good or bad, and then exposes their logic and assumptions, right? The logic can be from my experience or from what I've seen and what I read and all this stuff, and this data point and whatnot, you make a prediction. The training for TP2 is to be naturally skeptical of the other person's prediction. Because like I said, the future holds both. So you need reps at challenging their prediction, taking an opposite prediction and then exposing your logic and assumptions that actually allow you to engage in what typically people will call a healthy debate, but as things matter, you'll see it's not going to get very healthy, which is when they call it difficult conversations or conflict, right? And what you'll find for both people is that you're going to have to train to be very alert in little signals, details, because that's what is needed to make predictions into the future. In the past, you know what? They lost, they won, that what they call lagging result is there. On the future, it's not there. And so to be able to say, you know what, based on that variable that I think is going to change, right, based on what I'm seeing, and my logic of I've seen something similar before, I believe this is going to be a total win. And then that would suggest, like, should we spend more against it, double down? Someone will say, you know what, I'm kind of seeing it the other way. And that notion, earlier class we taught exploring the edges,
Yep.
right? When you actually spend money, resources, time, you spend energy. That's when a action is done, decision. And there's a real cost to spending. There's no cost technically, I like what Seth Godin said, except to maybe your ego, right?
Right.
Most things, not like the savannah, it's not a life and death. It's your ego that's at stake.
Right.
And having this debate, because if you go in, having explored the edges, and whatever decision you make that's somewhere within, right? You're more likely to make better decisions, especially when things are not straightforward. This is the training protocol. And the training protocol is built because one of the things that we've seen is talked about a special ops teammate, just like the sugar is bad, fermented food's good, silence is the worst for the mind, special ops teammate. This program is built with 10 people and you're having experience TPing with 5 different people over 13 weeks. Because you will see over time who is a better training partner, who ends up turning you into a special ops decision-making machine or unit. You will see someone who simply just echoes your stuff, or someone who simply you both walk away inconclusive. Every single I'm seeing doesn't require any action or decision. Is typically what happens, and then you're wondering why that we got the same results we got last week, because you both concluded nothing different, right? There's all kinds of elements of when you get it right, it is absolutely tense. We talked about, it's a spicy debate. Spicy, because remember, you're predicting the future.
And because like, I like what you
Right.
said earlier, Charlie, that the future data is your logic. It's your data bank of your logic. And this is where your judgment, your logic, that is being debated, right? Your judgment is being debated, is being
Well,
challenged.
it's not just your logic, but what judgment's made up of logic and assumptions.
Yes.
People pick up on
So,
different things.
Yeah, so like and Charlie and I, this is where,
That's
I
the
mean, we
idea.
could end up talking about one assumption, and now we're talking almost about our history of, well, when I was younger, this is how children, and now we're kind of in like, it can feel like very personal. You're like, wait a second, this is how I see the world. This is what I went through. Am I biased in that? But it really forces you to go into a level of detail, which is
people always-
what can flare up immune system, right? Which is
You know
like
the
your ego
classic-
and insecurity, because you're like, why are you thinking that way? I don't think, that's not how so now you're kind of, so this is where it just, and this is where tempo matters. You're trying to right? Like cut through some of that, but that's where if ego is flaring up, you can't. And so that's where you come out with poor decision making because someone's out of the game now. Now there's no discussion because somebody's, what was the word, like feeling triggered or,
We were talking about this at breakfast. You heard the phrase, don't take it personal, keep
Yeah.
it professional,
Yeah.
right? Kind of to get your emotion out of it.
Yeah.
Do you know what emotion, where it flares up the most? It's on predictions, on the extreme edges of predictions.
Yeah.
When you're most excited, you're like, I think this is gonna really work out,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or like, holy shit, this is scary as shit, I mean, something bad's about to happen.
Yeah.
It's your prediction, but without exposing it, you don't know what's flawed in the assumption you made, right? And the assumptions can be tiny. That person said this, but they paused before they said it, so I think they totally lied.
Yeah.
That's an assumption I'm making on what I heard.
Right.
Then my logic comes, because the last time I saw someone do something like this, like there's all, and so this is where, like, when I think about what adults especially are trained to do, right? A mature adult is a calm adult, demeanor, right? In control of my emotions, how I feel, don't overreact, don't blow up, right? And the fastest and easiest way to do it is to not let your mind go into predictions, right?
Just
Especially on the extreme edges.
keep it fuzzy.
Just like say, you know what, it's like, nobody knows, it's all made up anyways, right? And so stay calm, right?
Yeah.
But first, I'm telling you, mental chatter literally feeds on that like sugar, right? Like you get cancer from eating sugar because the bad bacteria just feeds on sugar. Your mental chatter loves when, and I like even Seth Godin what he said, like you get assurance and you're feeling good. And then you get new evidence and suddenly you don't feel so good. Meaning in today's information era, there's so much information flying by, it's near impossible to numb out and ignore all data points. And you can try to take all the drugs you want, drink all the alcohol you want, get as high as you want to try to find a way to numb out and keep that Zen-like, you know what, I really live life with no prediction, right? Just like, it's...
So dangerous.
Your brain is storing it. It's making predictions, whether you want to or not, like breathing. The problem is this, if you do not train the skill, say shallow breathing is bad, breathe with your diaphragm, it literally is like training yourself to do the worst and worst thing. And the notion that you cannot train and you cannot improve something you cannot see, you have to expose what is the hardest thing that our brain is doing to work smart.
I mean, ultimately, that word exposed, that's really what you end up feeling when you're putting out predictions, you feel exposed, right? It's like you feel exposed because your judgment, your logic, your assumptions, all of your past, present, future, all of it, like your brain, you said, it's using your head, it's your head now is exposed.
And the past, the present, very, very, there's actual details, much easier. It's all happened. So it's like we're kind of, usually in the past, we're arguing against our memory of stuff with someone, especially if you have a shared past, right? But on the future, it's all fair game, which is why it's so lethal. So you know how, I think Brent's the one who has in his Twitter handle that human beings have an endless capacity to avoid conflict. But guess what area of these three pies that people avoid more than anything else? It's having debate looking forward. And you'll see this theme ring everywhere. And yet, our mind is doing the work, right? Called mental chatter. And you're doing it alone, and you're like not learning how to train this. And then here's the biggest part. We're at the beginning of the year, right? I don't know how many of you put a goal of like, whatever ended December 31st, I want nothing to change and just try to coast the year exactly the same. Now, you might be a strong pessimist saying, you know what, because I had such a bad year, just being at the baseline of 0, right? Change would be a win for me this year. Like, so by the way, that exists. There are people like that, right? So many bad things happen. I nearly died, I this and all that stuff. So this year, not nearly dying, not getting sick, not losing everything, not getting robbed, not like, okay, I buy that. There's that. But if you had such a bad year last year, what makes you think that won't continue this year when everything's the exact same? I would say, and most things tend to accumulate. And accumulations, when you look, there's a term they call for revenue growth for a fast-growing company called hockey sticking, right? It kind of moves at a certain curve, and then suddenly it skyrockets. It goes the other way, too. Everything is good, and then suddenly it's like, what the hell happened? It's called a breaking point. Like I said, most good things, most bad things are tied to accumulation.
The accumulated.
And the thing with
bad
accumulation is you
breaking
cannot
point.
afford to blow the lead time. Time is what you can't get back. So the more indecision, the more do nothing, the more just wait and see you're doing, you can't get back, right? Because fast forward, you're going to be doing this same class next year, 2024. We're in 2023. It's kind of insane. I feel like just yesterday was 2020. Or was it 2019 or 2020?
Yeah.
We're in 2023 and do not have this discussion in 2024 because I did nothing materially different. And why I wouldn't do anything different is because I chose not to make a prediction. Because a prediction in detail that you then go and explore out, and how much more confidence when we say, I can see that's possible, but here's where we're gonna actually go and make a bet or a decision on.
I had this in my notes from our discussion last night. It sort of feels like living through life where you just have hope, and then you feel regret, and then you feel hope, and then you feel, it's kind of like.
I say hope is not a strategy.
It's not a strategy.
Right? It's a great way to manipulate people when you get voting and stuff, right? People love hope, right? Because it's fuzzy. Fuzzy really feels nice, right? And they have this history, there's this data about people who want presidencies always have a message of hope,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
They're good,
Yeah.
called politicians, right?
Yeah.
They're good at doing that. But
Yeah.
end of the day, you have to go do something.
To do something.
And the degree of how differently you do something results in a change. So this idea that, well, I don't want any change, the problem is the world's changing.
Right.
And the world is just throwing stuff at you, so just the act of being around, I think for most of us, the act of just being around is making us sicker, right? Danny's phrase of, we're not living longer, we're dying longer. Just waking up, you're whether it's the air you're breathing or every other thing around you're eating that you don't even realize is killing you, it's just, we're getting sicker. So you can't sit still without hurting your body and mind. If you like movies, this movie I love, World War Z, it sort of was fun to watch until COVID hit, and then suddenly feels too real. There's this whole thing about how Israel was the only country in the movie that didn't get this zombie disease, and they had what they call the 10th man rule. And the idea of the 10th man rule is that they've just been wrong so many times in predicting, they won't invade us, that won't happen. I don't know if this is actually true to Israel, but in the movie it was, which is that if there's a council of 10 that ran the country, if 9 people agreed on something, the job of the 10th person was no matter what to disagree and find a way to make that true. That to
The
me
opposing
is
view.
and you don't, and by the way, 10% committees, God forbid, that'll never work. The best team is 2. It's the job, if one person's certain, it's the job of the other person to be certain on the other side and not give in, but win them.
Win the argument. Yeah.
Right? Because when you go through, right, if the argument is spicy, it says, wow, that's a lot of uncertainty in front of us. If the argument is easy, you might as well both agree. I don't know why we're even arguing. This is pretty straightforward. It sounds like it's not even really a question of 2 possibilities. It's clearly just one possibility. Why are you even wasting our energy, right? And there are things like that. It's just one possibility, right? I'm pretty sure we'll all be hungry for lunch, right? I'm not sure we have to debate that, right? And the chances of me being right are kind of, for most people. This is a slide that we're updating on our culture tour, the notion that we're on a mission to fix work. And work we think about as the single biggest formation of teams, which is the way people get productive. And the idea that work is right now very broken and has been broken, shows up in history. And productivity is the term that's being thrown out a lot, being broken. And yet productivity is not being busy. It's not completing straightforward tasks. And the word straightforward suggests that someone also can give you instruction. Right? Someone can know, you want to know what you have to do to succeed? Just go do X, Y, Z. Do these 20 things, check it off, and we'll be done, right? So whether you make that list or someone else does, that's all straightforward. Productivity is navigating the unknown, advancing what your enterprise, company, or team, new territory, new ideas, new innovation that add value and produce results. However you measure results, not survey, we all feel productive, no, actual results. However, what we have seen in all the research and data is that with this change that occurred, employees simply haven't been trained in these skills. We all know how to work harder. There's a lot out there now, from not only how you need X hours of sleep and how to prep your to-do lists. And there's so many ways of how to work harder, right? Like how to work in sprints and stuff. I mean, it's all there now. But there's very little in understanding how to work smarter. There is literature out there, but it's still very nascent and a lot of misdirection. So understanding this is a huge part of what we go into. But of all the stuff we pulled together over the years, and this is like decades of accumulating knowledge, the biggest way to explain the productivity challenge is the left side to the right side. At the very top, I think about the map. You know, the map is like a puzzle. When you can see every aspect of the map is what we call working in the light or straightforward work. And it's like an assembly line. You do your part, give it to me, I'll do my part, and all of it comes together, and boom, 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 we succeed. Versus when the map looks like the right, where you're not even sure there are edges, you're not sure what's where. What the map looks like is there's some boxes that have light, that have straightforwardness to it. But even that's kind of disappearing so fast. Every assumption we have to look at, and most of the map is just made of just complete like unknown. And that's what leads to freezing and indecision. And so the way work organized people to attack a straightforward environment, straightforward work, was a command and control, what they call an org chart, right? There was someone in charge and they gave instruction, straightforward instructions, even better, right? More repeated, and you check that straightforward list to everybody below. First, as you go to the right, this represents, every circle represents small teams. Small teams, the smallest unit is 2. And the work we did even with all different groups, we see each small team is an autonomous decision-making unit. They have the ability to make predictions and make decisions to navigate the uncertainty. The way Admiral Burke phrased that was raids in the dark. That's what the Navy SEALs does. That's what special ops teams do. They work as a unit, and you know who is actually even more efficient and better at this than special ops teams like Navy SEALs? And this is the hard part that kind of is the truth out there. Terrorist cells do this with less capital, less resources. They're just amazing in doing bad work, but like amazing at like working as a unit independently. I mean, talk about like uncertainty and constantly life's at risk and whatnot. And this notion of, I'm not saying I must all be terrorists, but this notion of knowing how to make raids in the dark so we can actually advance, like getting this map from being so dark and so many question marks to lighter, this shift is the hardest shift to make. The work we did was kind of boiling this down to 2 skills you need. First and foremost is the decision making, right? You have to train how to make decisions in uncertainty. And that includes working with a small lead team. And so there's that portion. And then what you'll find is when you go into uncertainty and you start to make predictions, and you'll see you picked up on something that I did not, and now we have conflict. Because you think that data point's important, I think it's not, right? I didn't even notice it because it wasn't that important. Then you have your logic, which I think is not so good, and I'm going to challenge you on my logic, and all of that triggers this human immune system, right? And so one of the hardest things to unlearn is an over-responsive immune system response, meaning like why ego shows up in so many conversations. Seth Godin's point, your ego is hurt. You're not actually going to die, but we act like. You know how many people do that? I mean, the whole thing with the COVID politics, right?
Yeah.
If you back Trump, I can't be your friend. If you back Biden, I'm like, what? You guys have been friends, even family members, for decades, but off of some freaking politicians, you're gonna like choose to like, and this is the part, it's ego, right? So you get silence, you get conflict avoidance, and most of us have been repped and trained to too easily be triggered. We're fragile, we're defensive, and these very behaviors are the ones that prevent us from collaborating and teaming, especially on what matters most, which is making predictions, looking into the future, so that we can make decisions. So what's underneath this, there's more and more coming in. We have foundational training done. Module 1 versus foundational training in Module 3. Most of you here have, I think, been or done Module 1. Tom and the team is doing cool work on the data side, so you'll get a decision readiness score, which will show you how you're doing as a team, which will only help guide you. Module 3, though, this Modified 10X, it is the best program we have developed to date on how to train this exact thing. The notion of how do you debate what is the hardest form of what our mind is doing. Looking forward, making predictions, and challenging each other and experiencing this with 5 different people so that by the time you get to Module 4, you will find a TP. And that person will likely come out of the group and be the person who was best at giving you the most informed sense-making so that whatever decision you made, which is first, by the way, better than no decision ever, right? You have to make some decisions, but you made it with eyes wide open, looking on both sides. And then what we did, and one of the changes is this, when we built the program, I think we called the coaches that graduated master coaches. They're all being called leadership coaches. So we have a few hundred leadership coaches that have been sort of like basic training and some levels even higher. And each box you're seeing in each cell are taught by master coaches. So one example on the upper right is war games. The vice chief of the US Navy is actually building a war games training module that will be done in person and then also done virtually. And so leadership coaches, we will be investing quite a bit in what we call TTT, stands for train the trainer, so that there's a baseline curriculum that starts for decision-making, uncertainty, as well as immune system. And then there's a lot of curriculum. Some of them are just kind of one class curriculum, sometimes it's more, but all different components, whether it's taking the best doctor chef in the world, whether it's taking the best from the military, different groups. And so the notion of making an investment to have a leadership coach and train consistently every week with 10 people. And the notion that we've heard of all the response on the left side of the immune system was the difference it made on feeling like I have a voice. I'm not alone. I'm able to talk about this stuff and I can navigate and have difficult conversations so much better than mental chatter alone. That's all great, but you will never score and win, produce results doing number 2 in the immune side. You need to learn the skills to play offense, to actually advance into the darkness. And that is the part that I know a lot of you have been waiting for. We've been refining and building this. That's what we're launching. And so we have, I think on the site, if not, I think Laura can put a link to, sign up. We have coaches. We have around almost 24 coaches that are already initially trained to teach Module 3. We are rolling this out with the UK Navy contract that we have going. We have a lot of other groups going as well. I think it's going to be something that is going to make a material difference in not only your personal life, but also in work. You want to win, you need to know how to do this skill, and you need to expose it and refine it. Sri Kumar mentioned, he sent us his new book. There's a section in the book I like, just took a picture of it. He was talking about Roger Federer, Nadal, Djokovic, the greatest tennis players ever lived. Each of them works with a personal coach. And why is it? Right? Like kind of what is there left to learn? They're the best in the world, right? And there was a landmark article, I guess, in the New Yorker not so far back, talking about that he maintains that coaching done well may be the most significant intervention designed for human performance. I think that is something that is absolutely true. That the notion of the greatest number ones we've met in the world, in any field, has coaches. Leadership coaches above all else.
I love this because I feel, for years we've been, we've met some of the best coaches in the world. Most people are never going to be able to land a coach like that can talk to them and meet with them every week, maybe even every day, and deal with their psychosis, their psychology, and help them make good decisions. Once you find that person, you start repping that and you get better and better at that, it feels like you can't live without that person, understanding everything that's going on in your head. You just want to share everything because every data point, all the details is going to be sharpened, is going to be challenged, and it is a hard thing. This is where ego and triggering and all that, but it's like once you have that, you feel like you can't live without it.
This is just scribbles on our wall.
Yeah.
I think about the untrained mind versus the trained mind. The untrained mind makes decisions driven primarily by ego. And the second driver is energy conservation. We talk about most of the worst things in life will be accumulated issues, body and mind. Most of the best things will also be done consistently and accumulated. The problem with energy conservation, little things, consistent things, are never big enough signals in isolation. So we all wait. I need more data. I need more proof. We wait and we wait and wait and we blow all the lead time. We don't move fast enough. And then when someone tries to challenge you on some aspect of it, you use your ego to flare up why I didn't make a decision, right? Why I didn't make a prediction, whatnot. Versus a trained mind is obsessed with getting it right. Getting it right uses all three quadrants of the brain. Long-term future outlook matters, the present matters, the past matters. Oftentimes with ego, it's all about my way, me being right. Winning is about me winning. Getting it right is about winning, which means the people in my life also winning matters. Extract a pound of flesh out of them or capital or whatever it is. In the short term, you might be okay. Yeah, you fooled them. You took advantage of it, right? Except the problem is that they'll get you back. It has a cost. Getting it right is much harder than making a decision on what's just best for me. And then the second part that's important is the notion of habits. You have to find a way to do it on a consistent basis so that you are accumulating, right? A dial down of the bad habits, and you're accumulating a dial up of the right habits. This is the last, so the whole consistency is much, much harder. The last slide I had, kind of repeat of this. I think it's a good visual to recognize most of us are living life. If I am the vehicle, my life, me, driving myself as a vehicle, most of us are not realizing I choose to go and spend my life trying to find a way to figure out what to do by visiting the arrival terminal of any airport. And you are burning gas, you are having to be alert, windows are being knocked, and literally you don't feel autonomy, you don't feel control, and that's kind of what's happening for most people. And going in circles, having to repeat back over and over again.
Yeah, it's kind of thing makes me think about burnout. We had this conversation last night about burnout.
Yeah.
If you're not making predictions and actioning, you're burnt out, but it's like you're just going around the airport. You're burnt out, it is exhausting. It's kind of a miserable existence.
We'll take
And you guys
questions.
have questions?
I haven't
Yeah.
had a chance to take a look at the chat. I can put the
Yeah.
slides back up in
Small
slide mode if that helps
I know
anywhere.
Laura-
Happy to go to any slide, anything in detail, any questions. Got stuff in the parking lot, including.
Can we download these slides?
Yeah, it's actually, the video
Yeah.
gets released by noon tomorrow, so you can watch it, take screenshots, any of that, people have done. A chat or unmute.
It's a very serious topic.
Sorry?
We started funny and it got real serious real fast.
I think,
This idea that it's one of the biggest frustrations, I think, that, I've been working with Charlie for 25 years to try to distill what is the thing that is probably the most frustrating as a leader is when other people don't put out their prediction and they're waiting, Charlie would say, waiting for him to do it, but it takes risk to do that, right? Because now you're gonna be challenged, but everybody else will kind of keep quiet and just wait. It's so frustrating. So anyways, we think.
well, it's not only frustrating, but you'll see there is
Nothing
no
changes,
debate.
there's no debate.
There's no
Well,
debate.
nothing actually happens.
There's no debate. A one-sided debate is not a debate,
Yeah.
right? Which then goes into a lot of danger because a decision's being made with just one side of the
Right.
possibilities.
Right. Oh, Amir.
You want to unmute, Amira?
Yeah, I have a quick question. Can you hear me?
Yes, good.
Yeah. Okay, great. I have a quick question on this, thing. Do you have to have people be at the same level in terms of the training that they've gone through, or you can have a mix of people who have gone through the training and have been following you, and I mean, for it to be efficient, because you don't want to move too fast and then it just, try to roll it out and then it just doesn't work. It's a disaster. So yeah.
So the answer, it's a little more nuanced. So first, to recognize there's a specific reason over the years why we distill the training people in groups of 10. If you go smaller, it's not representative of the real world. When you get 10, you're gonna get a sample of those who are top, right?
Yeah.
Top 2, bottom 2, and then a lot in the middle.
Yeah.
And so it's training and working through leadership decision-making, navigating uncertainty, conflict and difficult conversations with a representative set. Because it's sometimes a lot easier, it's like, I just wanna take only the top 2 and top 2 and top 2 and just debate with them. But you'll see even that group will then eventually have a bottom 2, right? So it's just, and also people move through different things in life and experiences. So it's just natural to realize I need the most representative sample of reality, not fiction, not theoretical, for one. Having said this, the reason why we spent years and time even building this thing called a decision readiness score is that there will be some people, first, by the way, on this slide, let me just, give me 1 sec, my screen's all over the place. I'm gonna, when I look at this slide here, everybody needs training in number 1. I know some of us, I don't make decisions, I don't really make predictions. I'm telling you, if you do not actually recognize, like breathing, that you're doing this everywhere all the time and that you need the skill, like you're just gonna wait until you realize, holy shit, right? So hopefully it's one of those things you can't unsee now, recognizing everyone needs that training. Most people need to start training the immune system. And the reason is because as you try to do number 1, you'll find it so dysfunctional. It's like literally trying to have a debate where no one says anything, right? Like, so what's your opinion? I don't know, it can go either way, it's future, right? And what's your opinion? I kind of don't know either. But let me throw in something I saw this is kind of a little weird, this is odd.
Well, your point is nobody's
this
sticking
is
their
kind of
neck
like,
out.
like everyone throws in and you're like, and then if you were an outsider listening in, you'd say, what the hell are we talking about? Like the words you used, it literally is like, it's a string of jargon and no one said anything substantial. And so there's like nothing to glom onto in the conversation. So you end up having the equivalent of what I think is the worst. It's the low-calorie conversation that literally is not silent because it's like we're talking, but nothing is said, so you walk away remembering, what are we talking about?
Everybody makes fun of it. It's like the movies and meetings and the jargon that goes on. It's like nobody really knows what's being said, and somebody just throws out and lobs out another jargony term.
So there's a part where what we're finding is that we're able to run some metrics which gives a directional sense of where to start. We call it the equivalent of the rapid COVID test called DevGPS that shows people in groups of 10 where they should start. However, you want to start as many people as possible in groups of 10 at number 1 because that will move the numbers, that will move results. So the goal should be as fast as possible to get people training in number 1 if you can. And then the way that we built the program and maybe the change from even as we iterated was instead of thinking of like content that you sign up in 13 weeks, it's a commitment to a leadership coach in groups of 10 in 13-week increments. And the coaches are being trained with standard curriculum for the bottom starting point of both programs, but they're being given the autonomy to say, you know what, that last meeting got so dysfunctional, we're gonna go and visit an exercise on the immune side to help actually create some.
Which is why you're saying if there's almost like because your question was good, Amira, which is, you say you start in decision making and it almost feels like you're not ready, right? And it's almost sort of a false start. You can go into the immune training. And that is right. And so when Charlie's saying that from a content first versus coach first, we want people to go through a more standardized structure of content on both decision-making and immune system, but if you're gonna start in decision-making, because based on DevGPS, we think that you're stronger and less immune flare-ups will happen, you can start there, but the coach will direct you to the immune system training.
And the whole reason is this, there's the notion of like, the great things in life always kind of are like counter opposites, meaning, be patient. but also there are many ways you need to have urgency. And I believe the reality coming into a new year, we all have urgency. I want to do better, right? Some people are like, no, I want to stay the same. Well, how about if I told you you're going to do just as bad as last year?
Yeah.
You're going to be like, well, then I need to do better because I want to stay at zero, not minus. There's a notion of better is something you have to go fight for, go after. Whether you're a leader or CEO, whether you're just an individual, you want to do better and you need to train, number one, to do better. It's too much of life, and now, I mean, all the news about AI, AI is taking straightforward work, and they're trying to predict that AI is going to take the creative work too. Maybe. I'm still waiting to see that happen as of yet. Skynet, if you watch Terminator, isn't happening anytime soon. They're now talking about AI building AI, but like, you know what, like when that happens, that will happen right now. It's a human skill. Things that are not obvious patterns, computers can't do. Things that are not obvious patterns, human beings and teams can do. That's what predicting in uncertainty looks like. And you have to actually realize the blind spots of predicting what is always going to be inherently both possible outcomes, but going in things only one. That's not predicting. That's a blind spot. I don't know if Ramira, that helps answer.
Yeah, very much. Thank you.
Other questions?
I think
Any
Katie
of this?
Poe has a question. I don't know, Katie, can you unmute? I'm not sure. You usually can't, right? So,
You should put it in the chat.
yeah, so she's saying you have an amazing prediction. So I think there's a question, like if you have an amazing, okay, not today. You have an amazing, you can't speak up because she's in, I think it's the hospital, I can't remember. But so you have an amazing prediction, but no charismatic personality or confidence. How do you get people to follow? Do people only follow predictions that resonate somewhat, maybe somewhere in their body?
Sorry, I don't know if this helps. You know the idea for most people, whether it's in a company or whether families or friends, someone who is very good at making predictions is a very valuable person, right? You know the idea that we go to people for advice?
Yeah.
People who actually give good advice are good at making predictions. There was a thing I put in here from, and this is the part, I like this little part. Ray Dalio, Bridgewater founder, he was talking about even inexperienced people can have great ideas sometimes, right? Sometimes better than experienced people. And we find this a lot in hackathons and basically creation occurs with younger engineers. But this is the interesting part in his tweet. And that's because experienced thinkers can get stuck in their old ways. But if you've got a good ear, you will be able to tell when an inexperienced person is reasoning well. Reasoning well is exactly what this topic is about. So if you are saying that you are good at predicting, you have to dive deeper, saying you have to then also explain your reasoning. And you have to paper it in advance. The problem with actually thinking you did it and having it in hindsight, it doesn't count. Because we fool ourselves by distorting our ability being better than it is. Now, one way to do it is you can use email. It's a great tool. So if you have a prediction, right, and you can make predictions, even tied to time, not as opposed to 100 years from now, 10 eventually, time, right? Because that creates urgency too, right? And I think if you can predict even 6 months out, it's pretty good. And then list good or bad, right? Not a mediocre. Make sure you don't squirrel in the road because that's not a prediction. It can go both ways. It's not a prediction, right? You're going to have to pick one side and explain the reasoning behind it. Email it to someone, and the beauty of that is a timestamp, right? And then you can say when it happened, I'm good at predicting. Forward that email. That is your proof, right? But you need to have that detail. And then the only part they're going to, of course, ask is, well, can you show me the others? Because we can selectively skim and pick only the ones that were right and leave out the 99 where I was wrong, right? But where you will see the most experienced people will do is they'll value less your prediction, but they'll value the details of your reasoning. That's where the gold lies. And that's what this tweet kind of represents.
I mean, it's so interesting. As an example, one of the things Charlie and I were talking, I said, my son Matthew, soccer team, he's little, not the best, all this stuff. gets on the soccer team, really because they take everybody on the soccer team, because God forbid you cut anyone, 7th grade, 13 years old, but he was sitting the bench, and Charlie's prediction was that's not gonna be good for his psychology, right? The insecure, but he had to go into his past and his memory of certain times sitting on, so but I appreciate the reasoning and logic. And actually, my prediction was, I don't think it's gonna be a bad thing, but I wasn't sure, so I didn't play a sport like that, so, but it was so interesting because somebody else's perspective can help you. It doesn't mean I'm gonna go run out and take him off the team, but I had that data point from his past, from his history, but that logic of why, and it ended up being different, right? There's so many kids on the bench who started scrimmaging on the side. It ended up being a good thing, but, so now that's in my data bank, but then if somebody came to me, I'd have to share my logic, my reasoning, but then hear how their situation is different. But you can get into these nuanced details, and now you're helping somebody just sharpen their thinking. They don't have to go do that, but it's helping them, right?
Yeah, you have to realize, parenting is all about predicting.
Yeah.
Whether you realize it or not, that's all you're doing, right? And you're watching every signal, right? And you're actually challenging everything. Am I being lied to or not and whatnot? But so is coaching human beings, which is why this thing is built on a modified 10X. But you'll see the work is just as unpredictable as trying to imagine how someone turns out.
Yeah.
Right?
That's what it is.
Like looking at any human being, child, adults are even harder in many ways, right? Because they're also better at bluffing and playing poker, right? They're also very distorted in having convinced themselves of stuff that they actually say, I'm telling the truth. And you're like, I don't know, based on the actions you've taken, that's really the truth, but they can convince themselves they are. It's very difficult in those situations to actually make a prediction of where they will end up 6 months out. 3 months out, it's just harder, right? And so, but that we have found to be incredible training ground to actually work on something super hard that then the work actually is easier in comparison. But it's just as difficult, but it's just easier, slightly easier. And when you find teams, in teams of 2 able to do this, they can still get it wrong. But when you learn lessons is when you can dissect the reasoning that went in and the assumption that was right versus wrong, the logic that was right and wrong. And then through the course of iteration, you will see as a special ops team, they get smarter.
Right.
When they don't do
learned,
that,
right.
it literally, the repeated errors, you might as well come to work and hit your head on a brick wall every day and wondering, why can't we get through? I'm like, I don't understand how you're making your decisions, And so as a result of it, most people just look for straightforward work. There's a slide I put in here, it's a thing that's from off my wall here. Sam Altman was like one of the top entrepreneurs coming out of Y Combinator, became CEO of Y Combinator, and then left in 2015, is now the CEO of OpenAI, which is the big chat GPT company. So he and Elon Musk co-founded this company. So he's the CEO now of this thing. And he tweeted this thing recently. It's interesting, talking about colleges, right? And it's all talking about unlearning. What I think in the last decade or 2 colleges did. Colleges prioritized making people feel perfectly safe over everything else and produced a generation afraid to fail, and thus afraid to take risk, and thus on pace to accomplish extremely little. Also, it seems like people are way more focused on their perception and optics and personal brand than they were 10 to 20 years ago, and that this makes the whole phenomenon of wanting to stay perfectly on track even worse. Said another way, there is no real debate, right? And it's like the idea of prediction and even wokeism and all this stuff, if you're so certain on one side, that's not a prediction. That's, I think there's a slide I put in here about fact versus opinion, right? A prediction is an opinion, right? A fact is just a fact. Like, it's just true. The opinion is an expression of judgment. Predictions are expressions of judgment, opinions. And yet you can argue like it's a fact. And so if the internet said this is what you can say and can't say, then because you play, they don't even realize the notion that we're talking about predictions. Like,
No, it's so hard. It makes me think about, say, how can you be so certain on something? Like conviction and certainty. You can have conviction and certainty, but you have to be able to explain it, and then it's constantly doing that. I mean, Otherwise, it's like saying that you don't want to have certainty. You can't possibly have certainty because you don't know the future is uncertain. But you want to get to a place, right,
Except
where.
the part is this, a lot of work was filled with straightforward work.
Right.
And most people, their job was very straightforward. So I put this little thing on top saying, straightforward work requires just instruction. Schools, right? In the podcast with Seth Godin, he said the classic thing in schools people ask is this going to be on the test?
Yeah.
Which is your way of saying,
Yeah.
because if it is, I'm going to expend my mental energy on a short-term basis to memorize this thing so that I can actually do well on the test and then just forget I even learned it, right? This notion of looking for instruction, there's two parts. One is there's a greed of, I want approval from the boss. And there's fear of disapproval, and that's where straightforward work kind of drives most of what people do, behaviors. Versus there's a different part. And to unlearn this idea, what Sam Altman, what he's saying, and it's kind of interesting because he's building in the build ChatGPT, like it's gonna take straightforward work out. And I know there's arguments, well, it's all this creative stuff. No, it's doing a mashup of other people's creative work. It's not creating something completely new. Like it is a mashup of other people's, you can say that mashup doesn't exist.
You know, like the mashups when DJs take songs that have been from the past, and then, you know, there's all these cover songs coming out now from like 20 years ago, like I feel like every other's, but the actual real creative, like Taylor Swift, someone who make their own music, like she's the best-selling art, is a kind of, I'm not a big fan of her, but there's a reason why she is, because she's not doing mashups of creative, but you can still make a lot of money and do it with mashups of other people's creativity. But the real winning isn't that, right? Which is, I think, what we were saying, this ChatGPT. It can do creative work, but it's only taking other people's creative work and mashing it up.
Some of the stuff, if you listen to what they're saying on ChatGPT that's scary is this, it's having an assistant. I said this way back, Iron Man, if you ever watched the movies, Jarvis, it's Jarvis.
Yeah.
Tony Stark tells Jarvis what to do, but technically in the movie, he built the actual thing in a cave with no Jarvis. Then he came back and he built a much more robust version with a technical assistant called Jarvis, who just did it faster and worked overnight and, did the wishes of someone who told him what to do. The notion that the AI, the ChatGPT, will be the best instruction following a teammate out there, if you want to call it a teammate, just don't call it a teammate. So if you have, whether it's outsourced employees or workers and whatnot, you want them to just get done what you want, it's going to be easier to do it with tech. Telling me, hey, I get this done, I'll get it done, I won't do that, I don't feel like it, will you first listen to me, and I don't know, you'll just get it done, right? And then you can choose, I gave a good instruction or not.
Unlimited interns, basically.
Yeah, no, yes, unlimited
interns.
interns, but only interns in a field where they're big. It's like ESPN interns. The ESPN interns are like
ESPN
9 months.
intern.
Guys love sports so much. It's one of the few
yeah.
places still I get away with just murder. Like 9 months of unpaid internship just to then
so random.
earn a potential position at an entry level.
It's not
probably
computing for.
Yeah, no, but women have similar fields. They're
Yes. Oh, but
I remember the whole controversy at Super Bowl, all the dancers aren't paid,
Oh, yeah,
right? When they go on the halftime show?
Yeah,
Because I'll do it for free. There's enough people who do it for free.
yeah.
There's enough guys who will intern for free at ESPN.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, God, you get to go behind the scenes of
Yeah,
sports.
yeah, it's cool.
Watch sports all day. I can call that work.
Yeah.
Right? You will live at home, but but yes, unlimited interns of that sort. Because the interns I see are usually not ESPN interns. Even the interns are like, I don't like the strategy you're doing, and I have some opinions, and yes. So, this, I hope resonates. I think it's powerful. We are going to roll out rapidly people training on this. So we have coaches on it, we have training going, so I hope you guys will jump in, because I think it's basically how you score, produce results, so.
All right. Well, it's good to see you guys for the new year. Yep, 2023. Yeah, Liam's like thumbs up. It's good to see you guys. Brian Roth and everybody that was new that joined us. It was awesome to have you. Hopefully you stay with us. We are crazy. It's a good kind of crazy. All right. We'll see you guys next week.